Dogs had always been Karen's favorite pets because of their steadfastness, their warmth, and the way they brought life into a house. However, what she did not realize at the time was that her new pet was concealing a secret that was so horrifying that it would cause her to doubt all that she believed she understood about the universe. In her lonely little home on the edge of the woods, Karen had been daydreaming about getting a tiny puppy for a number of months. She wanted someone to keep her company while she was there. She ultimately went to the local animal shelter on a gloomy day, and as she walked through the rows of hopeful faces, her eyes eventually rested on him. It's Toby, a scruffy, medium-sized dog with brown fur that is dispersed in patches and eyes that are strangely clever. She was informed by the personnel at the shelter that he had been there for years, and that he had been passed over on several occasions, as if people could detect something strange about him. Karen, however, did not care. There was something about the way he stared at her that made it seem as if he was familiar with her, as if he had been anticipating her arrival. That same day, she led him back to his house. Initially, everything was in great order. In addition to following her around wherever she went, Toby would snuggle up at her feet as she worked and sleep next to her at night. He never yelled or complained out loud. He just observed. I am always keeping watch. But suddenly, the strange occurrences started to happen. Dog food was not consumed by Toby. Whenever Karen would fill his dish, she would discover that it was empty the next morning. Despite this, he never seemed to be hungry. After that, there came the noises which were like something adjusting its mouth. They were soft, damp clicks in the dark. Because of the weak light, his eyes sometimes did not reflect the light in the correct manner. Karen awoke one night to the sensation of something breathing on her face because she had been sleeping. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw Toby standing over her, his snout only a few inches away from hers. This man's mouth was gaping much too wide. Its too many teeth. That was certainly the last straw. She was certain that something was wrong, so she hurried him to the veterinarian the next morning. Up to the point when he inspected Toby's X-rays, the veterinarian, Dr. Reynolds, was first suspicious. As he pushed Karen away from him, his hands began to shake. Miss Carter, this isn't a dog on the X-ray. There was no evidence of normal canine anatomy, including no correct skeletal structure and no organs in the appropriate locations. Rather than that, there were layers, tissue folds that should not be present in the body. Additionally, something else is moving underneath all of this. Immediately, Dr. Reynolds placed a call to the authorities. Toby changed his clothes when the authorities came. The fur on his body began to recede, revealing skin that was pallid and sinewy. The twisting of his spine, accompanied by a horrific fracture, caused his limbs to lengthen. Then it broke the silence. For lack of words, not in any language that a human being could ever comprehend. Karen's bones began to hurt as a result of the sound, which was a rumbling, vibrating hum. Gunfire was started by the cops. The bullets tore into it, but the monster just stumbled, its shape altering like liquid, and the wounds rapidly closing up. It let out a last, unnatural shriek before lunging, not at the police, but through the glass and disappearing into the forest. Toby was never observed by Karen again. Sometimes, however, she is awakened by the sound of someone clawing at her door late at night, and from the woods outside her home, a sound that is reminiscent of a dog's whimper reverberates in the darkness. This sound is incorrect, too deep, and too knowing. We are waiting, looking over, feeling hungry. Even though it had been many weeks since Toby had vanished, Karen was unable to escape the sensation that something in the world was still missing. The police had disregarded her assertions, blaming them on factors such as stress, a wild animal, or anything else that was not the truth. However, she was aware. When it happened, The nightmares began. Toby remained the subject of her dreams each and every night, but he was no longer Toby. His body was distorting like wax that was melting, and his voice was a twisted murmur that called her name. He was something that was stretched and inappropriate. When she awoke, she was soaked in perspiration and confident that she had heard claws scraping across the glass of her private bedroom. When she was sitting in her living room by herself one evening, the television began to flicker to static. It became darker outside. The corridor was filled with the sound of a low, moist clicking. Karen became completely numb. She recognized that sound. She turned her head in a patient manner. A person could be seen standing there, hidden in the shadows of the doorway. It was tall and gaunt, with limbs that were too lengthy and joints that bent in ways that they shouldn't have. It was nearly human. It had a patchwork appearance, as if it had old fur that was falling off, and its face. Oh my God, the look on its face. The eyes of Toby were still present. The creature cocked its head to the side, and its lips sprang open into a smile that was too big for its skull. It sputtered, Karen, with a voice that was a horrible imitation of human speaking. She let out a scream. Immediately after she'd done so, the power suddenly went out entirely, leaving the whole home in full darkness. Her heart was pounding in her ears as she scurried backwards, knocking down a light in the process. Then there was complete silence. Not even a breath. No motion at all. Simply the claustrophobic and terrible feeling that she wasn't the only one in the room. During the process of dialing 911, she struggled for her phone, and her fingers shook as she did so. "Please state your emergency," the operator said to the caller. Karen murmured, "It's back," as she walked away. "The thing that was my dog, it's in my house." The kitchen made a creaking sound. Then someone else. "Gets closer." "Ma'am, officers are on the way," when the line was cut off. Karen let out a stifled breath. It was now that she was able to detect the odor of something putrid, like decaying flesh and damp fur. Suddenly, from the direction of her immediate rear, a voice that was not a voice. "You are supposed to love me." She whirled around, and just as the creature lurched forward, the scream that Karen let out was abruptly cut off when the object that had previously been with it stretched. Fingers tightening around her neck, Toby pushed into her with overwhelming force. As it pressed its breath on her face, it was hot and sour, and its mouth, which was too big, was oozing something viscous and black. The sound of its voice was a combination of a dog's whine and something much older. "You are supposed to keep me," it gurgled between its teeth. During her thrashing, Karen's eyesight became blurry, and her lungs struggled to take in breath. The flesh of the thing was being clawed by her fingers, although it was not really flesh. The situation was not the same. Something that seemed to be worms under the skin and moved in response to her touch. After that, there are sirens. There were flashes of blue and red lights coming through the windows. Before the thing retreated and hissed, Karen was able to let out a gasp and a strained breath as the creature's grasp became somewhat more relaxed. At the same time that heavy shoes were pounding up the porch, its head jerked toward the entrance. With a sound that sounded like flesh being torn apart, the monster underwent another transformation. Its limbs began to retract, its body shrunk, and fur began to grow in irregular spots until, in the low light, it nearly seemed to be Toby once more, not quite. The entrance door suddenly opened wide. Authority. Wherever we are able to be, the order that the officer was trying to give died in his throat as the beam of his flashlight fell on the beast. It sat in the middle of the living room, wheezing like a dog, with its head inclined in a way that seemed very innocent. On the other hand, God's eyes were completely off. "It's too dark." Knowing too much, Karen let out a shivering sob. "Take a photo." "Oh, please." A low whine was sent out by the monster as it crept closer in a manner reminiscent of a scared stray. A little lowering of the rifle was made by the younger cop. "Ma'am, it's just Stay." "No," Karen dashed back in a hurry. "It's not a dog at all. It may act as if." With his fingers stiff on the trigger, the more experienced officer paused. The monster then made a movement. Quickly, too quickly. The jaws of the creature unhinged like those of a snake as it pounced for the younger officer, and rows of needle teeth glistened in the sunlight. First, there was a gunshot, and then another one, but the situation did not cease. It made a moist crunch as it clung to the officer's arm and became attached. When the thing tugged on the guy, his flesh stretched out and his skin split like overripe fruit. The victim wailed while the creature pulled. The more experienced officer unloaded his magazine. Despite the fact that bullets tore through the monster's flesh and black ichor sprayed the walls, the thing did not cease to exist. The wounds on its body began to close up in front of their eyes as it twitched and rippled before them. Then, with a last guttural growl, it fled, smashing the glass of the living room as it disappeared into the night. There is no sound. A weak intake of air could be heard coming from the younger cop as he slumped, his arm twisted on the ground. An elderly officer radioed for assistance, his voice quivering as he did so. Although she was sitting amid the ruins of her house, Karen stared at the blood that was on her hands. This was not in the end, because at this point, she realized that Toby was not only a monster, and he was starving. He would return as well. When they came the next morning, a group of guys in black SUVs appeared. These men did not display their badges and whispered in hushed tones about containment and relocation. They removed the wounded cop from the scene. They cleaned Karen's residence with a scrub brush. After that, they helped her to a seat. "Miss Carter," the main agent remarked with a determined tone in his voice, "you have come across what we refer to as a mimic. Only a few exist." Even more difficult to put down, Karen's blood became ice cold. "How many are there?" The middleman was hesitant. "We are unable to say. However, their existence dates back hundreds of years. Until they are ready to eat, they remain hidden in plain sight, functioning as both pets and humans." Karen took a deep breath in. "And Toby?" There was a change in the agent's face. "Prior to this, he has been seen. There are a variety of varieties and names. However, he always leaves a trail of owners who have gone missing." Karen let out a stifled breath. "So what now?" Sliding a file across the table was the agent's action. The photographs were hazy images of an object with an excessive number of teeth and blurry video from the security camera. Finally, a single address is located at the bottom. This was the old shelter where she had discovered Toby. What the agent had to say was, "It's not just a shelter. This place is a hunting field. Moreover, we believe that you are the only one who can entice him to leave." On the file, Karen fixed her gaze. After that, she made her decision.